science is so fascinating, as you well know. Let's just get started, I guess. Vanessa Spina is her name. You know her already. She's Ketogenic Girl over on Instagram, and your 125,000 followers. Holy crap. Like, did that explode like all of a sudden? Where did that come from?
So that was painstaking growth of me getting up every day at 4 a.m. and searching hashtags and following people who were posting about it and commenting on all their posts and doing that for years. And I took a long time, but I would get up every day at 4 a.m. and spend at least an hour or two just doing that, just searching people who were searching keto. You know, back then it wasn't that many people, but I would just interact and engage with as many people as possible in the community, and, you know, just posting and offering as much value as I could. And it like just steadily really grew. And obviously the keto, you know, mania kind of took off, and so it really boosted that as well. But I'm so thankful that people really enjoyed whatever I'm putting out there and really appreciate it.
Right. Well, and you do a lot of good videos. You're very good at teaching. I often tell people about you. I'm like, you know, she has some broadcasting experience. All the rest of us schlubs had to like learn this on our own. I had a little bit of radio, but it wasn't like, ooh, I'm on camera. Ooh, I got to make sure I don't have a booger on my nose. You know, none of those kind of things that you know inherently from your training as a TV broadcaster.
Yeah, I was thinking about that this actually yesterday, just about media training and how fortunate I am that I got to have that media training doing that before, because there's so many little things that go into it. Like, you have to look into the camera as though you're looking at your best friend and
Right.
Smile a lot. There's just things, and, you know, not putting your head down for too long. Like, there's things that you have to learn, and it took a long time for me to learn them. So,
Well,
yeah,
and you don't like a deer in headlights. So
yeah.
today we have like if I did that on Jimmy Rants, people would stop watching immediately.
Oh, I've got some good ones from on YouTube from when I first started, and they are so cringeworthy of me just being like trying to interview guests and not knowing what I was doing. But over time, you get better and better, more comfortable.
Some of the early Living La Vida low carb show ever. Back on the Living La Vida low carb. I'm like, oh my God, who ever listened to that show? But I guess you get through those growing pains to get where you are.
Yes. Yeah. I was saying to Pete yesterday, I'm like, just do as many videos as you can. And that's how you get better. You know, you all know.
1,000 hours to master something. I've got way over 10,000.
Absolutely.
Well, you've been up to a lot of interesting things over the past year. It's been a little while since you've been on one of my podcasts. So catch us up on some of the classes that you've been taking and your education that makes you a lot more nerdier than you've been before. You were always kind of nerdy, but now you're really nerdy because you have all this knowledge from your education. Tell us about that experience.
Sure, I'd love to. So I first studied nutrition when I was in university as my electives. I was doing finance as my main, you know, focus and area of study in political science. Then I went back and got my sports nutrition specialist credentials. So I took that exam last summer. And at the same time, I did this new program that U of T started offering, which is a program in biomedical science. So it was all biochemistry, physiology, learning. The last course that I did in the last 2 years was all pharmaceuticals, which I didn't think I'd be interested in, but it's absolutely fascinating.
Right.
Yeah, fascinating. So to go back and learn biochemistry was amazing because I never had the confidence to do that when I was younger. And it's a shame because I love it so much. Like you were saying, you know, once you have more understanding and motivation, you really become more interested. And biology was one of my favorite courses in school, but I just didn't have the confidence. I didn't think I was smart enough.
Well, and then all that is once you learn the chemical pathways as to why those drugs are made the way they are and the biochemistry of how it works in the body to help with X problem, then you figure out, oh my gosh, that's the same pathway that this nutritional approach, this vitamin, this biohack, all apply to that same modality. And it's almost like this is the kind of thing you wish doctors were being taught in medical school.
Absolutely. That was the craziest thing. There were parts where I just got chills because I saw that they had, they're researching billions, they're putting billions into researching a drug that will do things that ketones can do, and you're like, wow, like you could actually just do this for free with your diet and lifestyle instead of, doing all of these expensive drugs. And it's the same pathways, like you were saying. It's really, really fascinating. So it was an amazing program, and having that concurrently with sports nutrition and studying that, I found to be really fascinating. Athletes, how we're fueled, all of that. It's been really amazing. So I'm really glad I decided to do that. It took 2 years
Wow.
of time, but it feels so worth it now. And I really feel like when we're sharing all of this stuff in our community, there's a responsibility to inform and educate yourself to the best of your ability so that, you're giving out the best information. And that was a big motivator for me.
It always cracks me up when they do a ketogenic research paper and the conclusion by the study authors at the end is, well, more research is needed so we can develop a pharmaceutical mimicking of this effect. And I'm going, is that what you got out of that research? Like, what kind of pharmaceutical can we shill on the public because we know they won't possibly cut their carbs and eat more fat?
Yeah, that's really sad that that's the conclusion often. And I don't understand why it's made to be so overly complicated. Like all this stuff is really simple, ultimately just eating real food. And it's amazing what happens to people, their health, everything, when they just do that instead of, having to rely on drugs. But there are maybe some people out there who just never will make those changes or can't make them.
But, I consider that a failure of explaining the why. Like we can always say, well, people won't make the change. Well, if you make it compelling enough, you can convince anybody of anything. And I think and it's not my job. It's not your job. It's incumbent upon the people that are in charge of the medical research, people that are basically practitioners, even dietitians. They all are culpable for making it compelling enough for people to change. You can't say, well, people won't change and just throw your hands up in the air. Well, that's why we need drugs. Well, that's a cop-out to me.
That's a really good point. I never thought about that there's a responsibility to, explain to people and connect the dots for them, as opposed to a lot of maybe the lack of information that we see or misinformation too that's out there.
I think they need a place in medical school where they explain some of that, because this is what's happening in medical school. They're saying, I've never been, but I would love to sit in a class just to kind of see, but they're learning about physiology, they're learning about pharmacology, but they're not talking about maybe psychology of how you talk to patients and say, okay, these are in the toolbox, the drugs and all the surgeries and all this kind of stuff. But here is the first best course of action that you can do. Lifestyle, diet, exercise, all the things. And then, okay, this is the preferred. You're never going to get better than this. This is the absolute best thing you can possibly do for your condition. All right, if you refuse to do that, you will get far inferior results from all of these other things. Now, which would you like to do?
Right.
Frame it in that way. How is a patient going to go, oh, yeah, I want shortcuts. I don't want to be as healthy as I can be. Right now, it's an equivalency. People think, oh, diet, exercise, biohacking, and everything is the same as a drug, and vice versa. And so then they drug thinking it's the same thing. Just like why people still take insulin as a type 2 diabetic. Oh, it's I can just take that. It covers up my carbs. No, how about not eating the carbs? I'm in rant mode today, Vanessa. So.
I love it. No, you're making some great points. So I fully agree. I mean, I just would love to see physicians offering both options, to everyone. Use lifestyle and there's this, and not just the same old advice that we heard that doesn't work, but like actual advice, and give them the option, because the doctors have so much power. If they dismiss real food and lifestyle and all of this, if they dismiss keto and these things, then the patients will too. And then it's not until they're super desperate that they start looking for these other, options.
And there's the other problem with all this too. Doctors don't have any knowledge about nutrition. I've interviewed hundreds of doctors, as have you on your podcast. Fast Keto is the name of her podcast, by the way, you guys go check it out. But on my podcast over the years, and almost every single one of them, I've barely got any nutrition. And I'm thinking we need to flip that on its head. Nutrition should be the first thing taught. And then the, physiology of it all and the biochemistry as you learned, and a little bit of the pharmacology, but let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's about nutrition primarily. Most of chronic diseases today goes back to insulin resistance, which is a nutrition problem, a carbohydrate intolerance problem.
Absolutely. I'm sure you've watched many of these, but Dr. Robert Lustig has these incredible videos on YouTube, and I watch some of them, every few months. And I watched one a couple weeks ago, and he's like, I learned all of this in biochemistry. Then I went to medical school and they trained it all out of me. And he says the same thing. So it's unfortunate that happens.
Yeah. So Vanessa, give us a nugget of wisdom. What was one thing that stood out? And you can get as complex, and I'll make you dumb it down so that us schlubs can understand it. But what's one thing you learned in the midst of all that schooling that you went through that stood out to you that you went, oh my gosh, that's an aha?
I had so many. I think one of the biggest ones is just understanding the difference between energy in the foods that we use and protein. And Dr. Ted Naiman is someone that I've learned a lot of that from. Amazing at explaining the biochemistry in really, really simple ways. Carbohydrates are carbohydrates and their actual structure and how the body breaks them down. And that fats are hydrates of carbon. It's basically just the two forms of energy that we can take in our diet. And then looking at protein as amino acids, essentially, that are broken down, chains of amino acids that are broken down, and then we utilize those as building blocks. Like that, I was studying that in school, and I also, Dr. Ted Naiman was putting out a lot of this stuff at the same time. And that really created a lot of insight for me in terms of understanding carbs and fat as energy and just protein as building blocks for all of our cells, enzymes, our hair, our skin, our muscle tissue. It's just so important. And seeing it that way and understanding what it is on a biochemical level, this is energy, this is protein, this is the stuff that my body needs to make tissue from, this is energy that's going to fuel me. It just really set off some big insights for me, and it started reframing the whole way that I look at nutrition and health and everything in it. So I credit my program to that, and also Dr. Ted Naiman with that.
Oh, Ted is amazing, and I've known him for well over a decade. In fact, I think he told me the other day when I interviewed him that the first podcast he was ever on was the Live and La Vida Low Carb Show. I'm like, wow, that's a long time. I think he had his concept then was burn fat, not sugar, was his original concept. And of course, he's talking about your stored body fat. And the way you do that is with more protein. And I think in the keto space, you and I have been in it for a long time, both of us. And when we first started talking keto, it was low carb, high fat, low carb, high fat, low carb, high fat. So I think at some point it became a semantical issue, because when people hear that phrase high fat, some people think, okay, you're just mainlining sticks of butter. And I've been accused of that online. I'm like, where have I literally ever said eat sticks of butter? That doesn't even sound appetizing. But people had this kind of notion, oh, high fat, you're just going, oh, all this stuff with fat. Ted was the one that said, okay, let's make protein the goal. And if you make protein the goal and you have the non-protein energy, as he calls fat and carbohydrate, and obviously he wants you to keep carbs low, then you're obviously going to make it so that it's not this preponderance of the diet. And of course, we're talking calorically speaking, it's still a high-fat diet, calorically speaking.
Yes.
But from a macronutrient perspective, actual grams, it's about a 2 gram of protein for 1 gram of fat. And this is freaking out a lot of people in keto. Well, I thought it was high fat. It's still high fat. So how do you explain this to people about putting the focus on protein when it seems like protein has kind of been pushed to the side in the keto space, but now people are seeing the value of making it the thing that you target?
Yeah, so for me, ketosis, keto is defined by the biochemical process of ketogenesis. So when our body is in that state, it is producing tiny pieces of fat from fat either that we're eating or that's stored on our body. And it's producing those tiny little pieces of fat called ketones. That's really how I see that state. But that state is defined more by your overall intake of carbohydrates. And keeping that at a certain level, you are still going to be able to be in ketogenesis and have a high-fat diet as well. High fat, all of these terms, like you said, are relative. So high fat relative to a regular diet, or high protein, it's more relative to a regular diet where people are not eating that much protein. You know, our dietary, the RDA of protein was set as a minimum that you need to meet in order to not become diseased. And yet it's interpreted as almost a ceiling.
Limit, right.
A limit. So if you prioritize protein, it's not necessarily going to make you go out of ketogenesis. There's actually really, really fascinating research showing it can actually deepen ketosis. And I like to think of it as the high fat component comes from the fat that you eat with the protein, also your own body fat. And we are actually rate limited in terms of how much fat every day we can burn from our stored energy. So we have to get some from the diet, but it's not something to fear. And a lot of people fear higher protein putting them in this state of gluconeogenesis. And I think that actually can happen. Your body can turn a lot of the protein that you eat into glucose, but it only happens under certain circumstances. So if there's no carb coming in with your protein, then your body may, at the pyruvate step down along the way, it may turn that into glucose because you don't have any coming in. So then your liver might make some glucose for you throughout the night to keep your brain online, all these things. But it doesn't necessarily happen in every case. And it's all about finding that right amount of protein where you meet the leucine threshold to complete muscle protein synthesis. You get enough for that, but you don't overdo it where you are eating just way more protein than your body actually needs.
Well, and therein lies the problem. People are like, how do I find that sweet spot? You talk to people like Ted, he will say, well, just eat all the protein you want because it's self-limiting at one point. At some point, the satiating property of protein, and I would argue the combination of protein fat, will keep you from overeating it. And so he doesn't think you can overconsume it. I will tell you a story of an N=1 I recently did. I want to get your comments about it. So, you know, I love eating and doing things. I was wearing a CGM, and I thought, okay, let's test eating a pound of chicken just to see what happens. So I sat over there. I tested my blood sugar. It was 82. All right, so let's eat this bad boy. I'm eating it. About 30 minutes later, it goes up to 86 or 7. Okay, typical response, not much of a change. Then 45 minutes in, I start feeling flush. I start getting hungry. I start getting real dizzy. I'm fatigued. I am laid out on this couch over here, Vanessa. And by 1 hour postprandial of 1 pound of chicken, I'm starving and my blood sugar's in the low 70s, like almost 12, 13, 14 points below baseline postprandial. It did not come back somewhat close to baseline again for 2.5 hours. And so I asked Ted about it. He's like, I don't know what happened. I was like, so my thinking, and I want to pick your brain on this, insulin's doing its job. So I obviously got some kind of a glucose response from those amino acids in the chicken. And we already know that amino acids in chicken tend to be a little more insulinogenic than the ones in maybe like beef, for example. So is it a glucagon issue? Is that what's going on? Maybe there's a little bit of glucagon resistance that might have kicked in that keeps my blood sugar from coming back up to stay in that homeostatic perfect range.
I love your idea of the glucagon resistance. I think we don't even know, even if Dr. Ted Naiman couldn't explain it, I'm not going to try because he would know best. But if it is, there's lots of different things with this issue. I think there's a scientist out there, Dr. Angela Stanton. I don't know if you've had her on the show before, but I would love to have you ask her on your show because what she does is this like craft test with people where she has them test their blood sugar every hour for the next 4 to 5 hours. And what she always finds is that people, if they have too much protein at the meal, their blood glucose will stay steady until around the 4-hour mark, and then it'll crash and they'll have a hypoglycemia. And I think this is missing a lot from the conversation about this topic, is that it only tends to happen after 4 or 5 hours because all the amino acids can't be stored, right? There's no storage other than muscle, so we have to utilize them in 4 to 5 hours. So if you're not using it for tissue replenishment or other enzymatic function, anything like that, then that amount is going to be, and whatever's in excess of muscle protein synthesis will be converted into glucose. The body's doing that. So but it's a delayed reaction. So most people miss it. So in her group, where she has migraine sufferers who do carnivore, she has them test 4 to 5 hours to see. So I was listening to that interview, wondering if you were going to mention what happened 4 to 5 hours, but for you, it happens really quickly.
I stopped because I felt, in fact, I almost ended it before the 2.5, but I was like, I've got to see it come back somewhat close to baseline. It got back to, I think, 78, and I'm like, that's close enough. And I ended it. I immediately went to the kitchen and made some eggs cooked in some butter, and within 10 minutes of eating that meal, I felt better. So it was obviously a fat deficiency in the original meal. Wasn't just the amount of food I was consuming, because a pound of chicken's a whole lot of food. I'm a big boy, but not that. I shouldn't get hungry is the point. And so when I ate that, then the hunger went away and I was able to fast the rest of the day, no problem. So is it really that small of a thing of just that little bit of fat?
It'd be so interesting to know if, I mean, I know you probably don't want to do it again, but the difference between chicken versus beef, or, you know, because chicken does have like those more insulinogenic amino acids in it, but.
So if I ate all, say, filet mignon, which is probably the leanest cut of beef cut, and so I wonder, I mean, that would be fun to eat some filet mignon. So.
I just have to do it for science, you know?
I have done that before, not specifically an official experiment, but I've had 2 filet mignons before, like a big bowl of that, and I don't get the shakiness. So physiologically, I don't feel that it goes down. I wasn't testing at the time, so I wonder if it is unique to chicken, which is why I don't often eat chicken, or if I do, I make sure I eat the fattier cuts of chicken. I at least know that for me, that's the best choice. But the breast obviously does something to me because it's so lean. Anyway, I just thought you'd find that fascinating, and it's very interesting about Angela Stanton's work of it's a delayed response into the 4th hour before you see it. No, I see it in 45 minutes. So something is speeding it up in me, and I wonder if glucagon has some role in that. It has to be.
Yeah, and she also talks about how what's interesting is the body will get used to how much you're eating at each meal, and then the pancreas will secrete the amount of insulin that it thinks you're going to need. So sometimes people's blood glucose will go down because they didn't have enough protein, that the body got used to secreting this amount of insulin, so then it overshoots it, and then people see their blood glucose go down. So the liver is making this, it's adapting to whatever you're doing and adjusting. So then she says you have to, keep the body guessing all the time so that it doesn't, adjust.
So that's interesting. I didn't think about, like, when you think about muscle building, you change things up so the stimulus is different, so the body doesn't go, okay, I know what I'm doing here, and you never grow. I never thought about like changing up diet like that. That's kind of interesting. I suppose that's why you get the benefit when you do an all-out fast for, say, 36 hours, and then you go and you have, 1,800 to 2,000 calories of like maybe a carnivore, and then that next day maybe you mix it up and have just a keto, with vegetables. And so I wonder if that's an interesting strategy. Is that the next like great diet trend? Let's mix it up every day.
That's actually exactly what I'm doing right now, and just cycling between carnivore and keto carnivore, or keto, and I'm just finding it works the best for me, is just having that sort of, not, I wouldn't say day to day, but mixing it up that way.
It's so fascinating the longer we do this. And of course, I've been out here talking about keto since 2012. That's when I did my first experiments on it after reading Bullock and Finney's book and started testing for ketosis. I still shudder at those first times I ever tested blood ketones, and they were $6 a strip for the Precision Extra. I remember writing the Abbott company and going, hey, there's going to be a lot of people wanting to test their blood ketones. You might want to mass produce these and get them out more readily and lower the price, obviously. And they're like, we're not interested in that. We only care about type 1 diabetics not getting ketoacidosis. And I'm going, that's kind of short-sighted. And now look at all the devices. Like I recently got one of these little breath ketone devices, this one here, the BioSense meter, and it translates to beta hydroxybutyrate at a 10-to-1 ratio. So if it shows a 10, then it's actually 1.0 on a blood ketone. So it's pretty cool. They've been doing some clinical trials on that one. But man, they missed the boat on that one. They could have made a boatload of money if they just thought this through a little bit.
I remember that, Jimmy, and I remember you contacting them, and they were like, no, we're not interested. And I was like, what? Well, but it gave other people opportunities.
They are the biggest manufacturer of these kind of devices in the world. And so it was a huge oversight on their part. I'm sure they're seeing Keto Mojo and Keto Coach X and all these other kind of pretenders that have come out after them and going, man, what, or maybe they didn't even notice.
Yeah, I'm glad at least other people jumped on it because, yeah, those have been massive opportunities.
Do you still test your ketones on a regular basis, or you've been doing this a very long time? And one thing I've noticed doing this for so long, and people kind of complain, oh my gosh, I don't get the high readings I used to get. And I'm like, do you want the high readings? Is that validating your keto experience? Or maybe, just maybe, your body has started to learn how to utilize exactly the number of ketones you make in your day-to-day so that your goal is actually to have 0 on that meter.
I've actually stopped testing for a while now because of that exact reason. And I find it fascinating that we chase these high ketone numbers when, and actually but Amy Berger, I think of her as a doctor practically, she did a blog post about, we don't want high blood glucose. So why would we want high blood ketones? And I tagged Dr. Ben Bickman in this as what if there's ketone resistance? At a certain point, your body just adapts so much. And what we do know is the body is always adapting. So my body, if you measure your ketones, you're seeing the result of what your liver made minus what you used. That's what's still circulating. So why would we want to have all this energy in our fuel lines, circulating? You want the body to be able to actually use it. And actually, Dr. Stanton, she says that when people first switch to keto, if they're coming from standard American diet, they can't use the ketones. And that's why they're higher in the bloodstream. And so I barely register them now, even eating 0 carb for, 2 years. And it's because my body is utilizing them as energy. I know I'm using my own body fats. It's very clear because I've tested my body composition, which is now down to 21% and going lower. So obviously I'm using my body fat and my body is making new muscle. So I'm going into ketosis, but it's not showing on there. So we need some kind of tool that, I think the breath might have more potential, but tools that can better help us to understand ketone utilization rates and not just what your liver made that you didn't use. Yeah,
when you prick your finger, that blood reading, people just make that the gospel truth. And of course, some people, when they first start, they're like 5.4 on the blood meter. Oh my gosh, I can have a bite of chocolate cake. I'm like, you're missing the points. Yeah, because your body is getting used to learning how to use them. And people freak out too. Oh my gosh, 5.4, it's so super high. I'm like, if you're worried about ketoacidosis, that's around 20. So you're very safe, I promise you.
I remember, in 2016, just even people mistaking ketoacidosis for ketosis. It was now I'm so glad that we're past that point that, the public understands Is it?
There's still some people that mix it up, but far less, that's for sure.
Right. It's just amazing how much keto has grown and people's just awareness of it in the last several years has really been incredible. But one thing I would love to see too is more understanding of blood glucose numbers, because we're all over here testing our blood glucose, making interpretations, thinking we know what it actually means. And yet I always think none of us were testing our blood glucose when we were doing like a high carb diet. So we have no idea. And actually turns out on a standard American diet, your blood glucose in the morning may be way lower than on carnivore zero carb, because on carnivore zero carb, your liver has to make a lot of glucose via gluconeogenesis. But if you're eating a lot of carbs, your liver doesn't have to. So people end up waking up with higher blood glucose. Their cortisol is higher for the same reason. And then that's another reason why, I know I did, people fear eating more protein. They're like, oh no, I'm having a blood glucose spike. But actually, your liver's making more glucose for you all throughout the night. And that's why people even see spikes go up above 100 in the night. It's just making it for your brain so you stay alive.
Right. And people forget about the cortisol response and the waking you up, and that can contribute to blood sugar being higher. I have regularly popped in the 1-teens in the morning for a very long time. I don't worry about it, because by noon, after I've had my first meal and everything settles down from that, it's in the 80s and 70s. So I'm really not worried about it at all. But people still want to freak out about those things.
Yes, I agree. And I think we just don't really fully understand it enough. It's still too new. But hopefully we'll start to understand it more.
Well, and what I want to see, and I know it's coming not soon, but I want to see in the coming years, which I think is far more important. And again, Amy Berger put this on the radar of a lot of people, is not just hyperglycemia, but hyperinsulinemia. When we can test insulin at home, Vanessa, that's going to be such a game changer, because people are like, well, my blood sugars stay in line, so I'm fine. I'm like, what's your insulin doing? Well, I don't know. I'm like, do you ever have it run? No. Will your doctor run it? No. Like, my doctor stopped running my fasting insulin. I'm like, you're kidding me. I have every reason to want to know what that number is, but he stopped running it. So I had to fire him and then go run it on my own. Now, thankfully, I have lots of doctor friends that I can talk to consult, but insulin is a part of this whole equation. Nobody really knows what their insulin is except us nerds that do it all the time.
Yeah. Yes, and a lot of times the insulin testing that they do is not very accurate, because there's only certain labs that can really measure it. So yeah, I agree with you 100%. When we can measure insulin, it's going to be a huge game changer. And you see it with people who even were skeptical about keto or low carb, and they try out a CGM, and then they go, oh, that airport snack I had sent my blood sugar up that high, and it starts to make you understand it more, just to see the trends at least.
Well, and it also sees how metabolically flexible you've become if you've been insulin resistant, which, I've been for most of my life. And then if you start to get insulin sensitivity, it shows up there. You see it there before you see the insulin going down into the single digit range and the other markers that you're healing. But yeah, I mean, we're seeing these people using these CGMs. That's got to be really kind of cool for you to see. I mean, you and I both have been trying to get people to test your blood sugar. So if you can pop something on your arm and just, and get it on a whim, how easy is that? And how easy would it be for doctors to prescribe these to even their non-diabetic patients? I hear so many people saying, why does my doctor deny me for a CGM? I'm like, because he's not quite educated on why you need one, which is why I'm loving a lot of the keto low carb doctors are saying, hey, if you want one and I'm in your state where I can prescribe you one, just contact me and I'll prescribe it.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And, Google supposedly is working on contact lenses that will be able to monitor blood glucose. So I think that could be a big game changer too.
Maybe. I just don't trust them because of some other things that are censoring information. So it's like, how accurate will it be? But that's a whole nother subject for another day. So where do you see the keto trend going? Because you and I are both successful authors. Keto Clarity for me, Keto Essentials for you. And did you have another book after that one, or was that the one that you did?
Just Keto Essentials. I've been working for a while on a new book, but I want to really take my time with this one. With Keto Essentials, like, everything was really exciting and like moving really fast, but I love writing and I really enjoy the process of creating. So I'm kind of taking my time, and whenever it's ready, it'll be ready. If it's 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, it doesn't matter to me. I just want to write something that's really going to be powerful and include all of the knowledge that I've learned since going back to school.
Right.
I see the keto space going, I think, recognizing more and more a couple of things. One, that body composition is the most important thing to measure. And unfortunately, that's another area where it can't measure accurately right now. We use bathroom scales to measure things, and it's such a poor measurement actually of what our body is doing, how it's being recomposed. And people get so frustrated that they're stalled and they're not seeing weight loss when, what we want to see is more muscle accretion and lower body fat. And you can't measure that with a scale. There's no home scale today that exists that is accurate enough. You have to get a professional body scan done. So when I'm constantly encouraging people to go and measure that way and do an annual body scan, because that's how you're going to be able to see how these changes are affecting your body composition.
Right.
And I think that that's going to help people understand more how important the prioritization of protein is. And I know that's a difficult thing for a lot of people, but you can start out, a lot of professionals out there, experts recommend a gram of protein per pound, either of your current body weight or your ideal body weight. And you have to test out and find different levels for yourself. But as long as you're prioritizing protein, your body composition most likely is changing towards more muscle, stronger bones, and our bone is mineralized protein, so you are going to be getting those beneficial effects. And your weight could actually go up, and it could be the best thing happening to you because you're getting more muscle, stronger bones, and less body fat. And you'll never know that if you're just measuring from a scale.
Yeah, I recently read a study on Jimmy RANTS that showed the combination of consuming more protein with resistance exercise actually did something that I've been told my whole career is impossible. It made the participants both build muscle and lose stored body fat simultaneously. Now, I don't know why people would think that it's a either or proposition, that you have to either grow muscle or lose body fat, but they lost both, or they gained one and they lost the other. So it's like, that just makes sense that you could do that. And you're right. That's kind of the goal of what you're trying to accomplish here.
Yeah, I had Dr. Stu Phillips on the podcast, and I asked him that question. He's like, absolutely, you can do it. But most in the bodybuilding space, people think you have to be in a caloric surplus in order to build muscle, and you won't be able to lose fat. And yet there is research, like the study you mentioned, that shows that you can do both. And I mean, what better way to do it than with keto, where you're restricting, controlling carbs, you're prioritizing protein and fat is going to help you do all of that and really make your body composition better. You can eat more food, you can burn more calories, you can boost your metabolic rate, and you'll just be stronger as you grow in life so that your health will be, better long term. So I really think that is where things are going. I'm seeing that as being a big trend, and also in food, seeing, people emphasizing the protein content and things more. I do see fasting seems to be like really trendy and gaining a lot of traction. Oh. And I have like mixed feelings about it.
Yeah.
You wrote the original.
Yeah, so I really got to pass it to Dr. Fong. I was trying to find it over here. Oh, here it is. That we talked about this like 4 years ago. And of course, Dr. Fong had been using it clinically for years. And of course, fasting has been out there since before the paleo days. So it's been out there a long time. And it's really interesting how it's kind of had this moment. And that book still sells like crazy. Like it's probably my best selling book right now, more than any of the others. And I think the magic of it is it does appeal no matter what you eat, whatever, no matter what your diet preference is, you can fast. And so I think that's what kind of helps it. But I think we're also looking at people understanding the benefits you get from it, the autophagy and some of the other benefits, the mTOR regulation. So, I mean, it's all of those things that I think makes it appealing as an adjunct to whatever you're doing.
I fully agree. I'm a huge fan of fasting and autophagy. My one concern with it is that it doesn't necessarily train people to eat long-term for improved body composition and boosting your metabolic rate. There are claims that it does boost metabolic rate, but it might do that by a small amount. But what really, really boosts your metabolic rate is exercise, strength training, exercise, resistance exercise, and also eating a lot of food. So you have to, I think it's a great tool as long as people don't rely on it as the only way to eat, and then, you know, they don't correct or change anything about their diet. It's still going to be better, you know, overall, even if you're doing a high carb diet and eating a lot of processed food, that you're fasting sometimes. But I hope people don't become too dependent on it and don't change their actual eating outside of that.
Yeah, I agree with that, by the way. And I think eating within a window is probably a pretty good idea, unless your satiety signals say, hey, dude, eat something. Don't be anal about it. Eat if your body's telling you to eat. But eating within that window and getting the intermittent fast, the vast majority of people are going to get the benefits that they want from that. And if you want to push it to 2-3 days every once in a while, as long as it's not a regular thing and you're not learning the habits, as you're saying here, and make sure you're fully fueled with protein as your primary fuel source. Long before you get into that, I have a friend of mine who said, hey, I wanted to fast for a week. I'm like, what have you eaten the past, week or so? Oh, maybe like 1,000 calories. What? And so I was like, okay, and your protein content? Oh, barely 40 grams. I'm like, eat protein first. Get that kind of stored up in your body. I know you don't store protein, but get it in your body so it can do all the things before you even think about fasting. I think people think fasting is a shortcut to nutrition. And I'm like, no. The nutrition is the shortcut to go to fasting. Did you freeze? Hello, hello. All right, you're back. What was the thing you heard me say?
Sorry, I lost you for a second. You were saying your friend ate 1,000 calories.
Yeah, so my friend ate 1,000 calories, and I was like, ooh. I was like, so how much protein was in that 1,000 calories? And they're like, oh, maybe 40 grams. I'm like, oh, eat protein, kind of get sufficient in that. You're not going to store the protein, but you want to get your body primed. And a lot of people, Vanessa, they see fasting as the means, fasting as the means to get into diet again. Because somebody says, oh, I come off the holidays, I'll just fast to get back into ketosis, get back keto again. And I'm like, no, you've got it backwards. Eat a good diet, get adequate protein and minimize carbs, and eat enough fat that comes naturally with the protein, and that helps you fast. So it's like people have these notions in their head that are just completely opposite.
Right, and you want to make sure, like you said, that you're eating a lot on your eating days so that you don't just start to downregulate your metabolism down really low. Some people start just eating like one meal a day, and it's hard to eat tons, like 2,000 calories in one meal. So you start training the body to just rely on like 700, 800 calories maybe in a day. And your body will get as much as it can from that amount of food. But, that's not really, to me, ideal, like just to be limited on a small amount of calories, like boosting your metabolic rate. So on your, I've heard you and Megan Ramos say all the time, like when you fast, when you feast, really make sure you get adequate fuel and food on those days when you aren't fasting. But I think it's really cool that it's come back as a trend. You look back, like we're in Greece right now, and you look back to ancient cultures, and they one of the oldest hospitals in the world, I think, where Hippocrates was here in Greece, and they had a section of the hospital that was just for fasting, and this is ageless information. It's so important, and to have it coming back now it's been awesome to see, and you've had a huge role in making that really popular again.
Thank you. And I have no desire to write any more fasting books. It's like, don't eat, just don't eat. It's hard to say more than those 3 words. Like one time I talked about as an April Fool's, we should just don't eat. Just that's all that's on the inside, make like a mock-up of it. So earlier you said you don't care with your upcoming book that you were still working on if it takes 2 years, 10 years, whatever. And I wanted to go to this because the keto trend as a food trend is still pretty popular. I just saw here in America, Chipotle is going to add rice cauliflower as an option for people like keto. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Like a cilantro lime cauliflower little thing. I thought that's kind of cool. Duh, about time you did that, Chipotle. They're test marketing it now, but it's going to be successful. They'll bring it out nationwide. But keto as a food trend is still there. Keto, you and I can attest to, keto as a publishing trend is already way on the downward slope. And so I think people think keto is still kind of this popular thing, but I think it's become oversaturated, and it makes it difficult for people like you and me who've been out there a while trying to articulate this. People hear all of these voices, read all of these books. I mean, I've written 9 books, but they've read all these books and they're just confused. That I think they're at the point where they've got what they think about the diet, whether it's higher protein, it's higher fat, it's this, it's that. Now they just want to have ways to implement it, which is why I love what you've done. You've created this 28-day keto challenge thing that you do. Definitely, guys, go check that out. 28-day keto challenge is the thing over on Instagram. Is that still successful? Are people still signing up for that kind of thing?
Yes, and since the beginning, my program's always been a meal plan with my support. So I've never sold the programs just to go and buy and do on your own. I mean, people obviously can do that if you want, but when I first started the 20-day Ketogenic Girl Challenge was about 4 years ago, and there's been a lot of copycats versions of it, like a lot of spam and things like that showed up on Instagram for a while. Thankfully, it's lessened now. But mine never really was super affected by that because it's always been my program with my support as well. So that was that intangible that you can't get if you just buy a meal plan from, some anonymous website. People have so many questions, as you know, from doing this for so many years, and they need support, and they need to be able to ask a question whenever they need it, and they need to have community around them and have, support. So I've always provided that as an integral program. That's what I love to do most, is just help people start this. You're not alone. We can do this together and help provide insight so that you're not just doing it by yourself.
Would you believe I still get people that write to me and say, what's a keto?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's going to be like successive waves, of people who come in to it, and we work and live in this space. So, I think, everyone knows about keto, and people say like you go out into a random crowd or a street corner and pull maybe 100 people, what is keto? Probably a really small fraction actually know what it is. So in some ways it's still really early stages, even though sometimes it feels like we've been doing this for a long time.
You know how I knew keto penetrated into the culture? I play Words with Friends. I'm a vicious Words with Friends player, and keto started being used as a word. And I was like,
wow.
Yes, because my book, the Keto Clarity, was the first one that put keto in the title. And so I was like, yes, we got it into the vernacular. Now let's explain what it means to people.
My favorite keto book of all is Keto Clarity. That was the one that I always tell you, like, I'd go for walks in the morning and listen to it on audio, and the moment of clarity, sound effect. I just love it. It's such a great book.
Thank you. Moment of clarity quote, Dr. David Perlmutter. Ding! It's so funny because my podcast producer was the one that produced the audiobook for me. It was the first audiobook with Victory Belt that they ever did. And so he's like, let's do something to distinguish these quotes that are separate. So you have to change your voice from the regular reading, and we're going to throw a ding in there. I'm like, I'm sorry, a what? Yeah, ding. And so that's been the one thing people comment on. They're like, the bell during the moment of clarity is a little much. So
I love that. That is cool.
Quote, don't you?
Yes.
So what's next for Vanessa? I know you're working on this book. The keto trend is going down, but that doesn't mean people will stop eating keto. There will always be people. I mean, I've been living La Vida low carb for over 15 years now. Everybody's going to always be interested in low carb diets. So are you thinking of rebranding it all away from fast keto? I know you're a ketogenic girl. I mean, at some point it won't be so chic to call yourself keto or ketogenic anymore.
I honestly think it still is, and I've thought about it a lot over the years, but the science of ketogenesis and what happens in the body when we restrict carbs and we, prioritize protein, have healthy fats, it is amazing, what happens in terms of how our body adjusts and adapts and makes ketones. And the therapeutic benefits of ketones they're just scratching the surface on that. So I think it's going to be really like a popular and interesting and fascinating topic for a long time. And I just am amazed by how small a percentage of the population still really doesn't know about it yet. There's so many people in our space, but all of us are early adopters and, people who tend to think what's coming next all the time. And you see that in our community. It's a lot of biohackers. It's a lot of people who are looking out for the latest leading edge thing. And then the other waves come of other people afterwards when, keto is just a normal thing or low carb. I think low carb and keto are both going to be around for a really, really long time. And I still think it's just the beginning.
I agree with you. And where I was going with that is I'm so glad in a way that the keto trend is passing, because now all the shysters who came in just to make a buck are out of the way, and who's left? The teachers, the people that actually care about this subject. And I feel like that 2017 through 2020, where we were really white hot with keto being popular, probably did a little bit of harm to, as much as it made the movement bigger, that people became more cognizant of it. And now you see people saying keto, 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 very easily. I think it did hurt us in a way, because some of those people came in that did not have the best of intentions. Now what's left is all of us who do have a heart for this subject.
Yes, I agree. And, I definitely think for a while there, it was overhyped, out of control, with all the network marketing stuff. And I think it really turned a lot of people off. And also people being given false information, if you drink these ketones, your body's going to burn fat. Well, no. So yeah, I love that aspect of it is definitely minimized now.
Oh, don't get me started on the exogenous ketones company. In fact, there was FTC sent a letter to them recently and said that they were using false claims in the midst of COVID-19, that it boosted immunity. And I'm going, yeah, you're getting yours now. You better shape up, because the FTC will shut you down.
Right. Oh, that's awesome.
Well, you guys, that's Vanessa Spina. I hope you've enjoyed hearing her today. Again, over on Instagram, she's Ketogenic Girl. I'm sure she could stand to pick up a few thousand or million followers of her work. You're definitely doing great work, and I've enjoyed having you as a great friend over the years, Vanessa. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to get to be on your show anytime, Jimmy.